all of us have the capacity to do really terrible things to each other. Not you, not me. None of us are capable of always being perfect and never doing any harm. And so the question is, how do we stop doing that? Hi, friend. Welcome to the good world.
1, 2, 3.
So come on in to a place that is fun. I'll be your friend and you can be mine. The world is a stream of constant bullshit, but that doesn't mean there's not a whole lot of good shit. You start with the mean and we can make something different. Let's build a world that is good.
This is a show for adults. I think if you had to come up with one sort of quintessential human action, one thing that all of us do that really sums up who we are as a species, it would be deluding ourselves to avoid feeling bad about something. Like, of all of the things we do, the thing that I think is most uniquely human is telling ourselves a story that is close enough to the truth that we can believe it, even if it's not really the truth. But believing it enables us to not have to deal with any inner conflict, not have to think through complicated things, not have to feel bad even for a moment. We really do not like feeling bad, we humans. And we will literally believe something that isn't true if we find it plausible enough in our brains that we can avoid feeling bad. There's a whole body of psychology research about this. It's called cognitive dissonance is the technical term. I think any time on here that I mention a technical term from social psychology, I have to sort of laugh at it and sort of comment on the fact that academia does just such a good job of coming up with jargon that is not intuitive and just hard to understand, hard to immediately figure out what it means from the term. And so it's like, it is terminology that sort of puts a barrier between most people and the understanding of it. In a lot of domains, that doesn't really matter. But in social psychology, it actually really bothers me because social psychology is a really important thing. It is the study of the things that all of us do, that all of us have in common, and in particular, the biases that are kind of built into our brains, shaped by evolution and humanity and whatever. So cognitive dissonance, which literally, I mean, it just kind of means emotional discomfort. But the important part of the research is that if there is something that gives us some sense of emotional discomfort, we will often, not always, but we will tend as human beings, we will tend to take that information and tell ourselves a different version of the story that solves the emotional discomfort. And sometimes that can get really, really wacky. Boy, I'm gonna go right to the Holocaust. I'm sorry, it's just what my brain does. As you may know if you've watched this enough times, or if you know me in person, my grandparents on my mom's side were Holocaust survivors, and so that is where my brain goes. And I do think a lot about the Nazis and how a person who was just a person living their life could become Hitler's willing executioners, right? How someone who is just living their life at home with their spouse and their children could go and participate in mass murder. Like that's not something that most of us wake up every morning thinking, oh, I could probably do some mass murder today. Like that's not a standard thing, but it is a thing that happens not just in the case of the Nazis. It's throughout world history. It's everywhere in the world. It is not unique to any one group of people in any one time or place. And so the question of how you get from waking up in the morning and having your coffee to participating in mass murder is an interesting one. And so when I talk about cognitive dissonance, the story that you end up having to tell yourself is, well, you know, a version of the story is Hitler, I'm German, right? I'm not. Now, I'm playing the character of a hypothetical German. So I'm Herman the German, which is not even my joke. It's from a musical called Sweet Charity, which some of you will know and some of you don't know as much as I do about musical theater. So I'm Herman the German, and World War I happens, and my country gets humiliated, and that sucks, and I feel bad about myself. And then there's massive inflation, and suddenly I'm going to try to buy, you know, sugar and flour and really basic stuff at the store, and I'm carrying literally a wheelbarrow full of money, and even that is not necessarily enough. And life feels pretty terrible. And this guy, Adolf Hitler, comes along and starts appearing and starts doing rallies talking about the lost German greatness, and I'm like, I feel terrible about myself, and so I feel terrible about my country. I used to not feel terrible about my country. I like what this guy's saying. And sort of gradually over time, and I don't know a lot about Hitler's early speeches. I would not be surprised if the anti-Semitism was there pretty early, but you can imagine being Herman the German and thinking, well, I miss feeling good about myself, and this guy is saying good things about Germany, and sure, sometimes he says some weird stuff about, like, Jews, but he makes me feel good about Germany, and so you sort of go along with it. And over time, that escalates, and he starts saying more and more terrible things about Jews, and I am already invested in the Hitler train. The train has left the station, and I'm like, well, I'm on this train. I guess he must be right. I guess the Jews must be bad. Reminder before anyone says terrible things in the comments, I am Jewish. My grandparents are Holocaust survivors. I'm just giving a hypothetical here. And trying to illustrate cognitive dissonance. So Herman the German maybe ends up, World War II breaks out, right? Herman the German has strong feelings of German pride, maybe enlists in the military, and has been internalizing these stories about how Jews are actually, I used to be happy about being a German, and now everything is terrible. Also, the financial system fell apart. Also, the Jews are overwhelmingly in charge of the financial system. Let's not acknowledge the fact that that happened for a lot of reasons that have to do with having been denied opportunities to work in every other industry. But so I can look and I can say, oh, well, I guess Hitler must be right. And I slowly start to think more and more, and you're sort of escalating. And then you get to a point where you are participating. You are assigned to be a guard in a concentration camp. You are assigned to do horrible things. I don't need to get into specifics. Anyway, I'm Herman the German. I'm doing horrible things in a concentration camp, but I rationalize it in my brain by convincing myself that the Jews are the secret enemy of my happiness. And that's how cognitive dissonance works. We're going to take a quick break.
Please like and subscribe. Please like and subscribe. Please like and subscribe. Please like and subscribe. Please like and subscribe.
So there we are. There's your weird and probably very disconcerting example of how cognitive dissonance works. But I'm just trying to illustrate that, this person, Herman the German, will have gone through all of these difficult feelings, and then after the war, after the Germans have lost and everyone is like, oh, Holocaust was bad, and people are starting to realize that, Herman the German has to sit there and reconcile all of these awful things that Herman the German cannot undo, can't go back and undo them, believed at the time they were the right thing, and now is stuck sort of dealing with these really messy feelings. You can either go in the direction of convincing yourself you were right all along and refusing to let go of that, or you can recognize all of us have the capacity to do really terrible things to each other. Like, that's not you, not me. None of us are capable of always being perfect and never doing any harm. It's just not, like, our brains are wired and conditioned by our circumstances and our environment to do a lot of horrible things to each other. And so the question is, how do we stop doing that, right? So if the classic, the quintessential human behavior is lying to ourselves to avoid feeling bad about something, then what do we do? A lot of the way that ends up getting resolved in reality is that people get to a point where they can't lie to themselves about it anymore, right? And so in the story of Herman the German, he's lying to himself through the entire war, and it's only after it can't lie to himself about it anymore. Maybe he can, depends on your capacity for deluding yourself, but maybe reaches a point where he says, oh, this was actually really bad. What do I do? How do I deal with this? And that's really hard, right? You can't undo that if you have killed people. You can't go back and bring them back to life. You just have to carry that with you. And that's really hard. And that is a form of trauma in its own right. And we see this kind of thing here in the US with all kinds of things, but it's a very common thing in the way that we talk about racism, where people talk about the way that our system was built under the assumption that black bodies were a commodity that could be sold and traded by landowning white people and forced to do labor. And so that's built into our system in a lot of ways. And when we try to talk about it collectively as a culture, there are a lot of people who, I understand how you get there. You grow up feeling really great about America, especially you grow up during the Cold War and you look at Stalin, like that guy did some terrible things. And you think, okay, well, if that's evil, this must be great. America is great. And then anything that makes you question the perfection and greatness of America is actually emotionally really difficult to deal with. And so we're going to resist it, and we're going to keep telling ourselves stories. And that's going on at a cultural level right now. And I just want to make a quick point, which is that none of us are perfect. None of the things that we human beings build are perfect. None of us are perfect. None of the things that we human beings build are perfect. Even people who lived 250 years ago and came up with a system of government that we use today were also not perfect. They were also just people like us trying to figure out how to put one foot in front of the other in this crazy world, having inherited a bunch of really cruel and broken systems and not always having the capacity to recognize the cruelty and brokenness of those systems. And so that's all any of this is. It's just the grand sum total of all of our ancestors trying to figure out how to do things. And sometimes we tell ourselves stories that continue us down the path of harm. And sometimes we let ourselves see some truth, even if it's a little hard, but that enables us to turn ourselves toward doing something good. And something that I've talked about in the past, if you go back to the videos I recorded from the car back when I was doing that, back in my Grass Valley days, like I've done a lot of harm to people. I have, I both emotional and physical, especially when I was younger. I've gotten better at it as I've gotten older, but I've hurt people a lot. And the easy instinct is to just look at myself and say, well, it's their fault. They provoked me. Or to sort of, try to distance myself from it and continue to think I'm a good person. Or what I have done is recognize that to the extent that any one of us is such a thing as good or evil, which we're all just kind of people, there's so much that I can't control, and I can't control anything about the past. But what I can do is recognize that I have within me that capacity to do a lot of harm, and I can work to change that. And cognitive dissonance and this idea of deluding ourselves to avoid a complicated and emotionally painful truth is actually a really, really important part of that story and that process. Because if you're not recognizing that you're doing it, you're just going to keep doing it. If you don't recognize that you're telling yourself a story that you want to believe instead of seeing the truth as it actually is, you're going to keep hurting people. You're probably going to hurt yourself along the way, too. You're going to end up darkening your soul, quite frankly. And so the only way, in my view, to move past that and to a place of real humanity and compassion and doing good by yourself and others and caring for yourself and caring for other people is to work really hard at getting around these stories that our brains want to tell ourselves. It's really asking every time you think something, thinking, is this actually true, or is this just a story I'm telling myself to feel a little more comfortable about it? I'm going to go on a quick tangent here, but it's going to come back. So one of part of some of the people I visited when I was in New York on my trip last week, I got together with my 3 college housemates, and the 3 of us had not been even in the same place in like 7 years, I think, and that was at the wedding of one of them, so she was not even really participating in the other 3 of us kind of hung out there. I think the last time the 4 of us actually got together and spent quality time together as a group was probably more than a decade ago. So it was really, really wonderful to get together with 3 of my best friends, and we just had such a wonderful time. We laughed so much, and it was really great. And all of us are in our own ways struggling right now, because who isn't? Because this world is crazy and broken and difficult. But it was great to be able to relate with each other about that and to talk and to laugh and all of those things. And part of the conversation that came up was the question of artificial intelligence, which is very much in the zeitgeist, right? In sort of the cultural atmosphere right now. People like talking about artificial intelligence. There's an idea of, I believe, Ray Kurzweil, I don't know, is a theorist who posited He predicted in, it was like 2004, 2005, that at some point computer processing power would surpass the processing power of the human brain, and and computers would evolve consciousness in a way that would enable them to improve themselves faster than humans can improve them. And I'm not going to say that's definitely not going to happen. It could happen. What I will say is I don't know how that will happen, because here is an important distinction between human brains and computers that people don't often think a lot about. So if you look at things that are generated by artificial intelligence, at this moment, I would quickly recommend a book. It's called You Look Like a Thing and I Love You, which is my favorite title. It's by Janelle Shane, I'm pretty sure is her name. I apologize if I'm getting that wrong, and I'll put a link down there. But it's about what artificial intelligence can, and importantly, what it can't do. And if you go to her website, which is it's called AI Weirdness, it's her blog. She recently did a thing where I'm trying to think. I think that it was the AIs trying to generate utopias and sort of describing utopias. There was another one where the AIs generated Valentine card ideas, and they're ridiculous. They're very, very funny and also interesting. But a thing that artificial intelligence struggles with is creating on its own. And what I mean by that is artificial intelligence, in order for it to do something that makes sense to us, it needs to replicate a human behavior. So it is the example I used in conversation with my friends is it's actually pretty easy to get some kind of algorithm or computer process to write music that sounds like Bach or music that sounds like Mozart. It is, as far as I know, it is literally impossible to get an algorithm to write music that doesn't sound like anything else and still sounds good. It is also pretty straightforward to get an algorithm to write text, to write prose that sounds like Shakespeare or sounds like an intellectual, I don't know, like a New York Times op-ed or some nonsense like that. You can make it sound like a lot of existing human things. It is, as far as I know, impossible. I'm going to keep going for a minute. It is, as far as I know, impossible to get an algorithm to write something that is a completely unique style, unlike any other human being, and still make sense. Like it can generate a bunch of random words that mean nothing. It can generate a word salad, but it can't actually. Right now, it can't create poetry without trying to mimic other existing poetry, and that switch, in my mind, and I'm not an expert on this generally, but in my mind, that leap is sort of similar to the leap that life on Earth took in going from single-celled organisms to multi-celled organisms. Like, it's possible, but it's a big leap. And just sort of assuming that because the amount of transistors we can put in a thing is growing doesn't actually mean that it will be able to make that category change. So, why am I talking about artificial intelligence? Why am I talking about the singularity? Well, we think about the singularity in terms of computers, evolving a consciousness that supersedes our own. And maybe we'll get there. Again, I don't see how. I certainly don't think it is as fast as simply throwing more and more processing power, because that computers are really good at doing like large level math. They're not great at doing art that isn't just trying to mimic what a human thinks art is. So cognitive dissonance is an example of one of the kinds of biases that is really built into our brain. And there are a lot of biases that are built into our brains. And the reason for that is the way that our brains work is very much like a computer algorithm. It's a complex algorithm, and it's got a lot more processing power than we know how to throw at anything. Right now, computers are still nowhere near as powerful as the human brain in terms of sort of what they can do. They can do very specific tasks very well, and a lot of tasks better than we can, but there are a whole lot of things we can do that they can't do. Great example of that is that if there's an algorithm that is trained to identify, like you showed a picture of, a dog and it says dog, and you showed a picture of a leaf and it says leaf. If it doesn't know what it's looking at, it tends to say giraffe because it's built on data from Google Photos, and giraffes are people post pictures of giraffes much more than giraffes actually exist in the world. And so the algorithm needs something to default to. And so you show it sort of a weird blobby nothing, and it goes, it's probably a giraffe, which is amazing. So our brains operate like algorithms, right? We start off, and there are algorithms that are based on the ways that our brain works. That's a neural network is the term for it. But literally, we are just processing our environment and constantly updating and changing our understanding of the things around us. And we're looking at things to mimic. But it is like an algorithm in that there are inputs, right, from the environment. There's the way that people around you treat you. There's the way that you look. There's where you are in the world and the climate and the vegetation and all of those things. And then there's also there are parameters, which is also like an algorithm. The parameters are your DNA, your genetics, things like that. And we're still pretty far away from figuring out how much of each of those things contributes. But in the case of an algorithm, the answer is they both contribute equally, and it's an interaction. And I think that's basically the same as the way that the human brain works. So, okay, our brains are algorithms, right? And cognitive dissonance is one of the processes that algorithm runs when we start to feel bad about something. We start to invent a story so we don't have to feel bad. And there are different versions of this in all kinds of places. There are different ways that our brains just take shortcuts to save processing power, because it takes energy to think through things. So if our brain is like an algorithm and we have the ability to train it, then the singularity isn't a hypothetical thing about artificial intelligence. The singularity is a hypothetical thing about human beings. We have the ability to write our own programming. There is a lot of evidence about meditation being a very useful way of doing that. That's one of the reasons that I have gotten really into mindfulness meditation. But there are a lot of ways you can do it. Anything that sort of enables you to focus. It also, your brain can do pretty much anything that you practice enough, right? Like the first time I picked up a guitar, I couldn't play. Then I eventually practiced enough, and now I can play lots of different chords. I can play lots of different songs. Serena Williams was not born knowing how to hit a tennis ball, but she practiced a lot. And yes, there are some genetic traits that are built in that make her better at it. There's a story I read at some point about how Michael Phelps, and I don't remember his name, but there was a distance runner who they are the same height, but Michael Phelps has a very long torso and short legs and very long arms, which makes his body much more suited to swimming. The other guy, long legs, short torso, more suited to distance running. But both of them had to practice to get there. Your brain can do anything you practice. And if what you're practicing is concentrating, if what you're practicing is letting yourself feel uncomfortable things so that you can work through them, if what you're practicing is seeing other people with compassion, you'll keep doing that and you'll get better at it, and it'll get easier and it'll come more naturally. If you don't practice those things, your brain is going to default to cognitive dissonance mode. It's going to default to its programming, and you're going to keep acting like the idiot algorithm that you are. I'm not saying this about you. I am also an idiot algorithm. Boy, has it taken me a lot of work just to get a little better, but I've gotten a little better, and every time it also gets a little easier. You should have seen me 2 or 3 years ago. I was scattered. Everything was insane. It's a lot better now. So this is my point. The singularity doesn't need to be a thing that we ask ourselves when we think about artificial intelligence, because probably it's an idea that is never actually going to come to fruition. But we can turn the question back on ourselves, and we can ask, how am I just following my programming mindlessly? And what can I do to fix my programming? And how can I make the world a little better through the process of fixing my programming, through the practice of fixing my programming? We don't have to worry about artificial intelligence nearly as much as we like to think we do, other than, if you give an AI a nuke, that's bad, right? Don't give it weapons, but other than that, we're probably okay. We actually have to worry a lot about human intelligence. We have to worry about our own brains, our own internal algorithms, and the ways that they take our environment and they take the parameters of who we are, and they can turn it into doing a lot of harm. They're just kind of reacting. And the way we change that is through practice. Just like the way that I get better at this process of standing here and making things up as I go is also through practice. The expression is practice makes perfect, but of course, As I already said, none of us are perfect. It doesn't make perfect, but practice makes a lot better. We're going to end there. Let's see just how out of tune this is. Ooh, it's still in tune. That's pretty amazing because I haven't picked it up in over 2 weeks. Well, that was quite a sound. Ooh, but I was excited about my ukulele. Okay. Well, thank you, friend, for your visit today. Now it's time we both go on our way. The world will still be insane tomorrow. I haven't practiced the song in a while either, can you tell? But don't let that fill your heart with sorrow. You can thrive in a desert, just ask a saguaro. Please give to my Patreon. Capitalism is fun. Let's build a world that is good. This is a show for adults.